Hey guys, tonight we wander through the smoke-choked hearths and ramshackle kitchens of medieval Europe, where every meal is a gamble, and what's for dinner might just be a threat. You're stepping barefoot onto the packed dirt floor of a peasant's cottage, brushing past hanging bundles of herbs, mostly decorative, ducking under a ceiling beam, low enough to brain you twice, and heading toward a pot bubbling ominously over the fire. The smell hits first. Not unpleasant, not quite pleasant either. It's earthy, a wet sort of stew. You peer in only to discover it's more like leaf broth, with a few floating insect legs. Yep, welcome to your daily dose of medieval soup. You ladle some out, and here's your first taste: boiled nettles, wild onions, a handful of barley if you're lucky. Bugs accidental, but protein is protein. It's not so much a recipe as it is whatever was still clinging to the bottom of your gathering basket. You slurp hoping for flavor and get the distinct taste of disappointment and... is that moss? Still chewing, you reach for a hunk of bread. It's more weapon than food. Stone hard, often a week old, and studded with flecks of ash from the communal oven, where everyone bakes their loaves together on a rotating schedule enforced by a steward with a serious stick. If you're lucky, the bread hasn't molded yet. If you're less lucky, it's crawling with weevils. You brush them off without much thought. That's not even the worst part. See, the flour used in this bread has already betrayed you. Ground by hand or using stone mills, the final product often includes tiny shards of grit. Every bite slowly wears down your teeth like sandpaper. Historians still argue whether the average medieval peasant lost teeth faster from decay or from basically eating mortar. Now let's talk grain. Wheat's for the rich. You're dining on rye oats, or maybe peas pounded into a coarse flour. And remember, grain is rarely clean. Mice and beetles love a granary, and medieval food storage is, let's call it, aspirational. By the time grain hits the table, it's already hosted half the neighborhood's vermin population. You notice someone dipping stale bread into the soup to soften it, a common trick. Medieval cuisine is all about rehydration. Dried out, burnt or crusty, soak it, chew slow, pray for flavor. Most people subsist on some variation of bread and stew every day for years. That's not just routine, it's nutritional monotony at its finest. The bread you're holding might have some fancy color to it. That's not food coloring. It's sometimes made darker with tree bark ash or animal blood to imitate expensive wheat loaves. No one's above a little peasant bakery fraud. You glance around the kitchen, if it can be called that. It's just a hearth, a few hooks for hanging pots, and maybe a wooden slab for chopping stained with generations of questionable meat. Smoke curls up into the rafters, where it builds into a thick soot ceiling. There's no chimney, just a hole in the roof, if the rain hasn't clogged it shut. You try to lean back, but bump into a wall of hanging herbs. Dried dill, some parsley, and what may or may not be hemlock. It's hard to tell. People use plants to flavor their food, sure, but also to cure their illnesses or keep spirits away. Your stew might be seasoned with superstition more than anything else. As you sit bowl in hand, you're joined by a few family members. You're all eating from the same dish. One spoon, maybe two. Hygiene's not a high priority, mostly because people don't yet understand germ theory. It's not gross if no one knows better, right? To your left, a child gnaws on what was probably a turnip, raw and bitter. Vegetables are mostly grown to survive, not to delight. Peasants don't get to be picky. Outside, someone's roasting a rat. That's not a joke. In times of scarcity or just regular medieval Tuesday, any protein source is fair game. Frogs, hedgehogs, crows, the poor can't afford to be squeamish. And besides, it's not like you're eating much of anything else. You try not to think about what this diet is doing to your body. No, really try. Medieval malnutrition is well documented. Lack of protein, constant exposure to parasites, and don't even get started on the dental decay. There's no such thing as dental care here. You chew until it hurts, then you just keep chewing. Historians still debate whether medieval peasant life was just barely tolerable or a non-stop exercise in edible punishment. One thing's certain: food wasn't the comfort zone. And yet, weirdly enough, you survive another meal. Barely. You put your bowl down on the table, a surface slick with grease from who knows when, and sigh. Your belly is fullish. Your teeth ache. You found one weevil leg between your molars, and that was breakfast. So before we move on to the next mealtime misery, ask yourself, how badly do you miss modern cereal? Dinner time rolls around again, and this time you're cautiously hopeful. Maybe there's something new on the menu. Maybe it's one of those rare days when someone trades eggs for stew, or you get lucky with a roasted pigeon. You inch closer to the fire pit and inhale deeply. Oh no. Nope. That's not dinner. That's danger. You wrinkle your nose at the sharp, sour tang wafting from the iron pot. You've smelled it before on laundry day when the soap's gone off, or during those weird spring thaws when the river gives off that dead fish perfume. It's meat, all right, but not fresh. Definitely not fresh. You reach in with a wooden ladle and pull out a chunk of something vaguely pork-shaped. It's grayish, a little green at the edge. You prod it gently, and it wobbles like it's considering becoming soup on its own. Here's the problem: there's no refrigerator. That's not a your ice maker broke kind of issue. That's a full-on nothing stays fresh unless it's winter and buried under snow situation. And it's summer. And that pig died last Thursday. Maybe, you're not entirely sure when, but it's here now and you've got mouths to feed. So you do what every sensible medieval cook does: you drown it in spices, whatever you have on hand. Pepper if you're rich or good at faking it, mustard seed, crushed juniper, garlic, even vinegar. Anything to distract from the undeniable funk of decomposition. Sometimes it works. More often it just adds a second layer of unpleasantness to the experience. Like perfume sprayed on a dirty shirt. Still meat's meat, and letting it go to waste feels like a mortal sin. You cut off the green bits, most of them anyway, and drop the rest into the pot. A good boil will kill the bad stuff right. Historians still argue whether boiling meat in medieval Europe was more about safety or softness. Spoiled food, if cooked long enough, might seem edible, but your gut knows the truth. You spoon some into your bowl. The texture is regrettable. Chewy in some places, mushy in others. There's a moment where your brain tries to identify the taste just long enough for regret to kick in. You push through. It's calories. Beside you, someone pulls out dried fish from a salt barrel. You watch them hack off a slab and gnaw like a dog on a rawhide chew toy. This fish isn't dried so much as mummified. It's preserved, sure, but it tastes like the inside of a ship's bilge. Still, it'll keep through the winter and doesn't attract rats like bread does, so there's that. Salt preservation is the big medieval solution to the no-fridge issue. Fish, pork, even cheese gets packed in so much salt, you might as well chew a salt lick. But here's the catch: salt is expensive. If you're inland, it's practically gold. So only the lucky or the connected get to do proper preserving. The rest wing it with a mixture of guesswork, brine, and quiet prayer. And when meat starts turning, there's a trick for that too. Cut it thin. Dry it over the hearth. Call it jerky. Ignore the smell. You grab a mug and wash the meat down with a sip of ale. It's warm, flat, slightly sour. But hey, it won't kill you. The water might. You'll get to that horror show soon enough. Now picture this: a traveling merchant rolls into town selling fresh sausages. The crowd gathers. The smell is enticing: spiced meat sizzling over a fire. People line up with coins, but you hesitate. Because you know, sausage is the medieval mystery bag. It hides everything. Offcuts, spoiled bits, questionable fillers, maybe even sawdust, or rodent. One scholar once joked that medieval sausage could contain anything but the butcher's name, which is funny until you bite into one and realize it's also kinda true. As you chew your second helping of meat, you notice a furry hairline that probably shouldn't be there. You don't say anything, neither does anyone else. No one wants to be that guy who ruins dinner. And here's the twisted part: all of this is normal. You're not in a famine, you're not on the battlefield. This is just a Tuesday night in a small village. The meat's going off, but it's been salted, boiled, or smoked. It's been dressed up in the culinary equivalent of stage makeup, and you're still eating it because what else is there? Your body doesn't love you for it. Medieval digestion is a brutal affair. Stomach cramps, bloating, and worse commonplace. Food poisoning is just a rough night. If it doesn't kill you, you're fine. Some accounts even mention stomach tonics made of vinegar and ashes to cleanse after questionable meals. No thanks. You'd rather roll the dice on spoiled stew than drink medieval detox juice. By the end of the meal, your teeth are sore, your stomach's uneasy, and there's a bead of sweat on your brow. Not from heat, but from pure digestive uncertainty. You sit back and let your body figure out whether it's going to accept or reject tonight's offering. Outside, dogs bark. Someone's burning garbage, which smells oddly better than dinner. A breeze drifts in, carrying the scent of hay and manure. But you don't mind. Anything that masks the lingering aftertaste of questionable pork is a gift. Still, you made it. You're full technically. You're alive miraculously. You've dodged another medieval mealtime minefield. So you blow out the candle, burp softly, not by choice, and lie back on your straw mat, wondering if breakfast will be any better. Spoiler, it won't. You wake up to the sound of coughing and chickens. A faint metallic taste already lingers in your mouth, and your stomach feels like it's chewing itself out of boredom. Breakfast time. There's no clatter of pans or cheerful aroma of sizzling bacon. Instead, there's just the creak of a wooden ladle, stirring another pot of gruel. Yep, gruel again. Imagine beige water. Now subtract flavor. That's gruel. You sit cross-legged on the cold floor and reach for your bowl. It's warm, thin, slightly lumpy. You take a bite, and it's like eating warm rain off a dusty roof. The texture is somewhere between porridge and apology, and yet it's a staple. Grain-based meals, porridges, gruels, and flat cakes are the backbone of the medieval diet. Easy to make, cheap to store, and filling in the soggy cement kind of way. Your gruel might be made from oats or barley, maybe peas pounded into mush. No milk, of course, unless you've got a cow and she hasn't died or been stolen. You slurp another spoonful and bite down on something crunchy. Oh, a bit of gravel. Again. That's from the millstones grinding the grain. Over time, the tiny stone fragments do a number on your teeth. Most adults in the Middle Ages have heavily worn molars. Your future is likely toothless stew sipping by age 35. Historians still argue whether these worn-down teeth were an accepted part of life, or just the tragic side effect of desperate eating. Either way, your jaw hurts just thinking about it. And let's talk guts. That constant intake of the same grains, barely washed vegetables, and questionable fats leads to a very specific kind of digestive despair. Flatulence abundant, constipation frequent, diarrhea also frequent. Somehow both extremes coexist like badly behaved roommates. You don't mention it to anyone, of course. Everyone's used to the background hum of stomach discomfort. It's as much a part of daily life as cold toes and splinters. Some people try to vary things by adding a splash of animal fat to their gruel. It gives it a richer flavor, if by richer you mean vaguely barnyard. Others toss in leftover turnip chunks or dried legumes. But the problem with dried legumes is they can turn your insides into a percussion band. The communal sleeping space doesn't exactly offer privacy, so everyone hears your personal musical performance throughout the night. The only real change comes during harvest season, when grains are fresh and slightly less riddled with mold. But even then, most are stored in sacks, where mice and moisture are constant threats. It's not uncommon to find droppings cooked into your meal. Protein. Sure. Sanity questionable. And food rotation. You're eating what's oldest first, not what's safest. By the time you reach the bottom of the grain sack, it's a gamble every time you lift the lid. Now let's add some social spice to this bland bowl. You, dear listener, are at the bottom of the food chain. Nobles eat fine wheat. You eat the scraps of whatever's too tough, dark, or coarse. You might trade for better stuff, but it's rare. And hoarding punishable. One town over, a guy was caught hiding grain and got publicly dunked in a swamp. Twice. Meals aren't private either. You eat with family, neighbors, guests, even strangers passing through. Everyone dips from the same bowl, uses their own knife, and hopes no one's sick. Spoiler. Someone is always sick. You look over at your neighbor, a toothless old woman gnawing on her wooden spoon handle. She coughs wetly right into the communal pot. No one blinks. Just another morning in paradise. Occasionally a wandering friar passes through and offers advice on digestion: eat less, pray more, chew with intention. You nod politely and hope he doesn't bless the soup. Last time someone did that, it curdled instantly. Divine intervention or just bad timing. You might find the occasional luxury item if your village is near a trade route. Maybe a sprinkle of imported spice, a pinch of dried herb, or on rare occasions a cube of sugar. But even then it's mostly for show. Your taste buds have long since died from underuse. To keep things moving digestively speaking, some folks chew on fennel or licorice root. Others swear by dandelion tea. A few brave souls boil foxglove leaves. Don't try that one. It's poisonous. Historians still debate whether medieval herbal medicine helped more than it harmed, but it definitely did something. After breakfast, you clean your bowl. Not with soap, just a quick wipe with a crust of old bread or a splash of ale. If you're lucky, you get to leave the bowl out in the rain and call it washed. Your body lurches forward with a gurgle. That's the gruel talking. You pat your belly and make a silent plea for peace. The rest of the day is long, full of hard labor, aching backs, and little energy, but at least your stomach's technically full. A small child passes by holding a hard biscuit, biting into it like it's treasure. You smile. Food might be bad, but hunger is worse. So you stretch, yawn, and get ready for the day's work. With any luck, by nightfall, someone will have caught a squirrel or stolen a goose, and you'll get to taste something you can actually chew without risk of dental collapse. But until then, it's just you, your gruel, and the slow erosion of your will to eat. By the time dusk rolls in and the hearth glows again, you find yourself staring at the one ingredient that seems to outlive everything else in the medieval pantry: salt. Your lips are already chapped, your mouth's like old parchment, and you know what's coming. Tonight's meal salted something. Again. You watch as a heavy slab of fish is pulled from a barrel and slapped onto a splintered wooden board. It thunks like firewood. Thick white crystals crust every surface. It's so salty it could dry your tears before they fall. and you're supposed to eat it. Salt is king here. It preserves meat. It masks the taste of rot. It keeps cheese from becoming a science experiment. It's used in cures and deals, even in wages. Ever heard the phrase, worth your salt? You're living it. But when it comes to food, it's a flavor bully. It doesn't enhance, it dominates. Tonight's menu item, salt cod, or what's left of it. It's been soaking in a pot of cold water for hours to soften it up. Spoiler, it hasn't. Its rubbery smells like sea ghosts, and the salt's still so aggressive it stings your tongue. But you chew because what choice do you have? Medieval folks used salt the way we use Tupperware and cling film. Without it, food just dies faster. Or worse, comes alive with maggots. So meat is layered in salt, packed tight, and left to dry. But here's the rub, literally. Salt was expensive. If you lived inland, it had to be traded in. And you didn't always get the good stuff. Sometimes you bought reused salt scooped from barrels that had already done their preserving duties. That's not a culinary tip. That's a threat to your immune system. Historians still argue whether peasants actually had regular access to salt-preserved food, or if this was more a luxury of the merchant class. But one thing's for sure, when you do get salted meat, it's not a treat, it's a trial. You gnaw through the cod like it's a soggy belt. The salt burns your gums. Your eyes sting. You gulp water, then remember why that's a bad idea. It's not just the flavor, it's what salt does to you. It dries you out, dehydrates you, triggers thirst like a fire alarm. And the more salt you eat, the more water you need. But the more water you drink, the more... Well, we'll talk about water soon. Let's just say your options aren't ideal. You reach for a piece of hard bread to go with your salty dinner. Bad move. Now your whole mouth feels like it's shrinking. You grab a mug of ale to chase it down. Better. Until you realize the ale's gone flat and picked up a vinegary tang. It's not spoiled, just enthusiastic. The salt isn't just in meat or fish. It's in your butter, your cheese, your sauces, if you're fancy enough to have sauces. It's even rubbed onto fresh vegetables sometimes to draw out the humor. That's not a joke. Medieval medical theory believed salt balanced the body's inner elements. You're not seasoning your salad, you're adjusting your temperament. Some people try to cut the saltiness with herbs or vinegar. Others mix salt-cured meat into stew to spread the sting across more bites. But the salt always wins. Always. It's like trying to hide a cannonball in a pillow. And there's the after effect. No one wants to talk about the thirst that follows you to bed. You lie there, parched eyes, dry tongue rough, dreaming of water that won't betray you. You might wake in the night with leg cramps or pounding headaches. You think, oh no, am I dying? Nope. Just sodium overload. You think back to market day, when a traveling spice merchant was offering saffron and cinnamon. Everyone gathered around in awe, but you watched another guy quietly walk off with a small sack of salt, like he'd just stolen the crown jewels. Priorities. Salt taxes were real too. In some places, kings and councils imposed levies on salt, because if people had to use it, why not make it a luxury? In France, centuries later, the Gabelle salt tax became infamous for sparking unrest. And here you are just hoping your cod doesn't dehydrate your soul. Once in a while, you might be lucky enough to trade for smoked meat instead of salted. A rabbit hung over a smoky hearth for a week becomes chewy and oddly sweet. The smoke preserves it, hides mild rot, and makes your whole cottage smell like a chimney. But at least you won't wake up with a tongue like sandpaper. Still, most nights tonight, included your meal feels more like punishment than pleasure. You push the last bit of salted meat aside. You can't. Not again. Your stomach agrees. So you lie back on your straw mat, eyes closed, whispering a silent prayer for a fresh egg, a soft plum, or just one bite of food that doesn't make you feel like you're being slowly turned into jerky from the inside out. Sleep comes eventually, but your dreams, they're dry. Very, very dry. You wake with a strange ache in your jaw and a strange craving for oranges. That's weird. You've never even seen an orange, but your gums are sore and a little puffy, your mouth tastes metallic, and your body is waving a very ancient, very desperate flag. Vitamin C, please. Too bad. You're in medieval Europe, and citrus might as well be dragon treasure. You rub your jaw and sit up slowly, wondering if that raw turnip from last week might have caused this dull, constant ache in your mouth, or if it's just the slow onset of scurvy. That's right. Scurvy isn't just for pirates, it's for everyone who hasn't seen a fresh fruit in months. Here's the medieval diet in a sad little nutshell: carbs, salt, and more carbs. Vegetables are seasonal, inconsistent, and often boiled until they've given up on life. Fruit perishable, rare, expensive, and very, very suspect. You pick through breakfast, hoping for something different, but it's the usual barley bread, yesterday's stew, and maybe a pickled something that used to be a beet. You chew slowly each bite, tugging uncomfortably at your sore gums. You notice someone 2 mats over spitting blood into a rag. You look away. That's the scurvy talking. Historians still argue whether scurvy was common among inland peasants or just a risk for seafarers. But signs of vitamin deficiencies show up in plenty of skeletal remains. Swollen joints, porous bones, even old healed fractures that never set right, all whispering the same thing: nutritional horror show. And it's not just about C. You're probably low on iron, calcium, and whatever it is that stops your nails from snapping like old twigs. There are no multivitamins, no nutrition labels, and no doctors with helpful advice. If you're lucky, there's a midwife with herbs. If you're not lucky, there's a priest with incense. You glance at the table again. Someone's got a reddish fruit. Is that an apple? Your heart leaps, but nope, just a roasted onion. A very optimistic roasted onion. Close enough for a medieval peasant. When fruit does make an appearance, it's usually dried. Apples, plums, or figs, shriveled little ghost versions of what they once were. And drying helps them last longer, but it sucks out most of the vitamins. You chew on one, hoping for a zing of health, and get a flavor more like old shoe dipped in wine. Still, it's a break from the usual salt fest. You reach for a mug of ale again, but you hesitate. Your tongue feels like it's bruised, your teeth wiggle ever so slightly, and you're starting to suspect your body is staging a quiet rebellion. A friend offers you a handful of sour berries from the woods. You hesitate. Some are edible, some are a death sentence. It's roulette medieval style. You remember someone mentioning herbal tonics for the blood. Nettles, dandelion root, maybe elderberry. You nod politely. But inside you're thinking, I'd trade a whole year of barley gruel for one juicy orange. Here's the twisted part. Nobles didn't fare that much better nutritionally. Sure, they got meat, spices, and pastries, but vegetables were seen as peasant food. Leafy greens too bitter, roots too dirty, salad too raw to trust. Some physicians even warned against raw fruit, claiming it opened the pores to disease. So everyone's gums were probably grumbling, regardless of social status. Once in a great while, a wealthy house might have access to imported citrus lemons from the Mediterranean, maybe a single orange during festival time. But not for you. You're left gnawing on a radish and trying not to think about your gums receding like the tide. You wander outside to the herb patch. Maybe something here can help. Parsley. It's technically vitamin-rich. Sorrel. Slightly citrusy. You chew a leaf and immediately regret it. It tastes like lawn clippings, and you're not a cow. Some monks write about the healing power of gardens. They praise the use of sage mint and rose hips. In fact, rose hips are loaded with vitamin C, but you'd have to know how to harvest and prepare them, and also not be deathly afraid of thorns. Most peasants don't have time for foraging manuals. They're just trying not to starve. And if you do get scurvy, there's no diagnosis, no name. Your joints ache, your wounds don't heal, your teeth fall out, and you slowly waste away. People think you're cursed or sinful. You start coughing blood and someone calls for a priest, not a doctor. Your soul gets more attention than your diet. You sit back inside staring at your bowl of vegetable mush. Today, someone's added a sprig of something leafy on top, parsley maybe. Decorative, useless. You eat it anyway. By evening, your mouth feels raw and your body's unusually tired. You lie down and wonder how you're supposed to keep laboring day after day without collapsing. A nearby child sneezes twice, and someone makes the sign of the cross. Illness is close, and you're in no shape to fight it. You curl into the straw, half hoping for a dream of citrus groves and clean water. But instead, all you get is a taste of last night's salt cod burping its way back into your mouth. Sleep well, vitamin-deficient hero. Your body's doing the best it can with the absolute worst menu in history. You wake up gasping, not from a nightmare, but from thirst. Your tongue feels like it's been sun-dried and dipped in flour. You roll over and reach for your mug, only to remember water might kill you. You sit up and glance at the small wooden bucket near the door. The water inside is murky with a sheen that suggests it's aged a little overnight. A few floating bits, straw, maybe a gnat or two bob around lazily. It's not exactly poison, but it's definitely suspicious. And yet, this is the best you've got. In medieval towns and villages, clean water is more fantasy than fact. Wells are shallow, rivers double as sewers, and rainwater, when collected, sits around long enough to breed entire ecosystems. You lift the bucket and pause. A voice in your head whispers, "It's just hydration roulette." Historians still argue whether people understood how dangerous their water was, or if they just associated it with bad humors and ill airs. What we know, they noticed that people got sick after drinking it. So most folks stopped trying. You take a hesitant sip. It tastes like soil and old wood. There's a weird sharpness to it, like it picked up someone's laundry soap on the way down the hill. You cough. And then you switch to Plan B ale. This is why everyone from toddlers to grannies to monks drinks ale all day. Not strong frothy pub ale, but weak watered down small beer. Brewed just enough to kill off the worst of the microbes, but not enough to get you drunk by noon. Usually, you grab your mug and take a long swig. It's sour, slightly warm, but safer than the water. Your gut thanks you, sort of. Brewing ale is a daily chore. Everyone does it, even nuns. Especially nuns. They were the microbrewers of their time. Households keep batches bubbling over the hearth using hops or herbs to flavor it, and maybe disguise the fact that the barley went bad a bit. It's a craft. It's a ritual. And most importantly, it's survival. The downside. You're always at least a little buzzed, or bloated, or both. Kids stumble around slurring bedtime stories. Adults develop impressive beer bellies by age 23, and everyone farts. A lot. Some households switch things up with mead, a honey wine that's sweeter and more potent, but that's a luxury. Mead takes time, resources, and bees. Most peasants don't have extra honey lying around. They barely have bees, or time. Occasionally someone tries to boil their water first. Good instinct, bad implementation. You see, without germ theory, boiling is just a suggestion from the neighbor with the smart wife. And boiling requires fuel wood or peat, which is expensive and time-consuming. So most people skip it and gamble instead. That gamble often leads to dysentery, or as you start to call it, Tuesday. It begins with cramps. Then frequent urgent runs to the outhouse, if you even have one. Often it's just a designated bush, a communal ditch, or that sad little corner of the field nobody talks about. You know someone who died of it last winter. Fever, dehydration, and misery, all from one bad gulp. Still you need liquid, so you keep drinking ale. It's your lifeline. When you feel brave, maybe a bit of herbal tea made with mint yarrow or elderflower. It sounds nice, but often tastes like someone boiled weeds in a boot. You remember a story of a village that tried to build a better well, deeper, lined with stone and covered to keep animals out. It worked, for a while, until the cow fell in. You're starting to notice how this whole society runs on compromises. Eat stale food, drink weak ale, survive another day. There's no ideal. Just what probably won't kill you today. When visiting a market town, you might see someone selling holy water, promised to be safe, clean, and blessed. You laugh quietly. Even holy water gets scooped from the same river the 3 people just bathed in upstream. You pass. And what about the monks with their fancy cloisters and clean stone channels? Surely they have good water, right? Sort of. Their drainage systems are better, and they know how to filter with sand and charcoal sometimes. But even they get sick. No one's safe. Not even God's favorites. You sip more ale and listen to your stomach bubble like a cauldron. It's always talking these days. Gurgling, growling, sometimes groaning. Your whole digestive system is a medieval opera of protest. Outside, someone's child is drinking from a puddle. You wince, but their parent doesn't stop them. What else is there? Rain barrels are common, but they go stagnant fast. Sometimes people toss in silver coins to purify the water. Sometimes that works. Sometimes it just makes the water taste metallic and disappointingly expensive. You dream sometimes of clear mountain streams, sparkling, icy, untouched by livestock or chamber pots. But dreams are all they are. Here water is a threat, and ale is your lukewarm shield. You curl back into your straw bed as evening sets in your stomach, heavy with grain, alcohol, and unasked questions. The air is thick. Your tongue still feels dry. And somewhere deep inside, your kidneys are probably waving tiny white flags. You whisper a little prayer, not for a miracle, but for one good rain, one clean cup, one honest sip. Morning again. Your head is a bit foggy, your breath smells like warm bread crust, and your first coherent thought is, did I have too much ale again? The answer is yes. But don't worry, you're in good company. In medieval Europe, everyone is slightly drunk, even babies. You roll over and hear the soft glug of someone pouring the day's first mug of small beer. It's barely 3% alcohol, but you're on your 3rd cup, and it's not even sunrise. This isn't a party, it's hydration. The thing is, medieval folks don't trust water for good reason, as you now know, so ale becomes the default drink. It's not fancy, it's not refreshing, it's just safe-ish, and it's made everywhere. Taverns, kitchens, monasteries. Even little kids brew it at home under the suspicious supervision of grandmothers who can spot a bad ferment by smell alone. Brewing is so embedded into daily life, it's basically considered a chore like sweeping or chasing chickens. You shuffle toward breakfast and find a little wooden cup sitting next to a crust of barley bread. You pick it up and sip and instantly get a mild yeasty oat soup flavor. It's like someone forgot to finish making the beer, which they did. That's the point. This weak ale or small beer is the breakfast drink of champions. Adults drink it, toddlers drink it. Even monks who have taken vows of silence and solemnity drink it all day long. You once saw a friar bless a loaf of bread with one hand and swig from a tankard with the other. Holy Spirit indeed. Historians still argue whether the ale was really safer than water or just less obviously lethal. Either way, it made people feel a little better about sipping from a world full of latrines. You sit beside a boy no older than 6 sipping his own cup. His cheeks are flushed and he burps with confidence. Across the room, an old woman stirs her porridge with a slosh of ale because, why not? It's calories, liquid, and flavor all in one. But the constant low-level inebriation comes with trade-offs. For starters, your memory is foggier. Conversations blur. Work slows. And don't even try climbing a ladder after lunch. More than a few barns have fallen victim to post-noon ale accidents. There's a term for this, bread drunk. Not really from the bread itself, but from the sheer amount of grain-based alcohol everyone consumes. Your body is mostly barley at this point. Occasionally you'll find someone sipping mead, a honey wine reserved for special events, weddings, or the lucky few who keep bees. It's thicker, stronger, sweeter, and far more dangerous. 1 cup might warm your belly. 3 will send you out into the street shouting verses from forgotten prayers. The nobles, meanwhile, drink wine imported expensive and occasionally watered down to make it last. You had a sip once at a harvest feast. It tasted like sour grapes and envy. But for you, it's ale day in, day out. By late afternoon, your limbs feel heavier, your eyes lazier, and your sense of balance. Optional. Still, the brew keeps you alive. It's not just hydration, it's nutrition. Some ales are thick enough to count as liquid bread. They contain fiber, yeast, and trace vitamins. Monks refer to ale as liquid sustenance, especially during fasts when food is forbidden, but drinking isn't. Genius loophole. So on fasting days, of which there are many, people survive on beer alone. No meat, no problem. Just top off your mug and chew your calories. Children are weaned onto ale early, not because parents are careless, but because the alternative is cholera in a cup. You walk through the village square and see a man tripping over his own cart. He's not drunk exactly, just deeply, profoundly ale-tired. His wife scolds him half-heartedly while sipping her own mug. You keep walking, passing taverns that already have a morning crowd. These aren't partygoers. They're farmers, smiths, and bakers looking for a morning pick-me-up. Or maybe just a place where the beer's slightly colder than their house. Inside one tavern, the innkeeper pours ale from a wooden barrel into clay jugs. The smell is sweet, sour, yeasty. Familiar. The brew is slightly bubbly, brewed with bog myrtle or wormwood instead of hops. Each batch is different. Each batch is hope in a jug. Sometimes when times are really hard, people make ale, porridge, bread, beer, and a bit of whatever root vegetable they've managed to scrounge. It's slop, but it's warm. And it fills the belly. Of course, not all ale is good ale. Some is too sour. Some ferments wrong. You remember that one batch that smelled like goat feet and tasted like betrayal. People still drank it. Waste not, want not. By evening, you're tipsy, foolish, and ready to lie flat and listen to the world spin gently around you. Your neighbor hums a lullaby, slightly slurred. A child gig. You lie back heavy and drowsy. The ale seeps into your limbs like warm fog, and your thoughts drift lazily like smoke up the rafters. Around you, the entire village is in that same peculiar state, buzzed but functional. Not drunk enough to stumble well most of the time, but never entirely clear either. Evening meals are more of the same. A thick wedge of brown bread, some porridge reheated from breakfast, maybe a ladle full of stew if someone managed to catch or trade for a bit of marrowbone. And of course more ale. Stronger now brewed, longer left to deepen in both flavor and consequences. The children are fussy and flushed. The old men slur their folk tales a little more than usual. You laugh a bit too loudly at a joke that wasn't funny, then laugh again because no one else did. A good mood clings to everything like soot on the beams. There's talk of the alewives, the women who brew from home, marking their doors with a broomstick to show fresh batches are ready. You visited one last week. Her ale had a bite to it, and possibly a beetle. Still, it was better than your last attempt, which exploded in the cellar and killed 3 mice by aroma alone. You stretch out beside the fire, cheeks, warm, bones heavy. Someone passes you a half-full mug with a wink. You sip it and nearly choke. Mead. Real clover honey mead. Sweet and sharp, and your vision swims a little. You blink twice and hold it close like treasure. You remember vaguely hearing that even the monasteries ration out gallons of beer per monk per day. Beer is health. Beer is comfort. Beer is frankly the backbone of medieval hydration. And you understand why. It's the only thing that hasn't betrayed you lately. As the embers dim and the village murmurs itself to sleep, you curl under a threadbare wool blanket and whisper your last thought for the night. Thank the saints for fermentation. Tomorrow arrives with the low, rhythmic thump of hooves on muddy ground and the jangle of chainmail. You peek out the slats of your window if you're lucky enough to have one and see a caravan rolling by. Merchants, nobles, soldiers, and with them a faint delicious smell of something roasting. Meat. You lick your lips instinctively, not because you're about to eat any, but because the idea of meat has that effect now. You shuffle outside, stomach already growling. It's market day, which means you'll at least see some meat today, even if you can't touch it. You follow the scent through the crowd until you find the source, a vendor, with skewers of pork crackling over open flame. They're glistening, hissing, and definitely not for you. Because here's the bitter truth: meat is for the elite. Nobles feast. You fantasize. You glance down at your own lunch, a bowl of watery pottage with 2 lonely lentils trying not to drown. You poke at it with a stick and sigh. Back in your hut, meat only shows up when something dies accidentally. A chicken caught in a storm. A pig that broke its leg. A deer that wandered too close to the village and got accidentally hunted despite the king's forest laws. Oh, didn't know that. Yeah, you're not allowed to hunt. That's royal business. Even if a plump deer is practically begging to be eaten, killing it could land you in the stocks or worse. Poaching is illegal and immoral, according to the people with swords, and wildly common. Still, when someone does score a bird or rabbit, it's like a holiday. The meat is cooked slowly, shared in tiny pieces, and never wasted. Broth is sipped. Bones are cracked for marrow. You once saw someone boil a hoof just to make soup taste more meaty. It worked. Kind of. Historians still debate how often peasants actually got meat. Some say once a week, others say once a season. Most agree if it wasn't salted, dried, or smuggled, you probably weren't eating it. You wander past the noble's manor and peek through the outer gate. A cook walks by with a tray venison capon, maybe even roast swan. The smells reach you like a dream through iron bars. And what's worse, they don't even eat all of it. The rich feast in excess: roast boars with golden apples in their mouths, pies that bleed, pigeons' courses stacked like edible monuments. You meanwhile are scraping the last trace of lard from your bread, just to remember what fat tastes like. Occasionally you get invited to a feast day, usually tied to some saint's celebration or a village event. There's meat there, but it comes with rules. No elbows on the table, no burping, and no reaching for seconds unless invited. You get a slice, maybe 2, then it's back to your usual vegetable sludge. At church you hear sermons about gluttony and how the meek shall inherit the earth. You nod and try not to think about how hungry meek people usually are. But meat doesn't just symbolize class, it defines it. The upper crust dines on game beef and fatty geese. The middle classes might afford bacon or offal. The poor, they dream. You've had more squirrel than chicken, more bone broth than beef. You recall a noble once throwing scraps to a dog while you watched from the gate. That dog had more meat in its week than you'd see all month. Sometimes you barter with a hunter for a few slices of dried boar. He takes your threadbare cloak in exchange. You try to make it last. You slice it thin, mix it into pottage, nibble it like treasure. It tastes wild, smoky, and almost makes you cry. The kitchen in your cottage is laughably under-equipped for meat. No spit, no iron pan, barely a hook to hang anything. Meat takes time. Tools, wood. Even if you had a whole chicken, cooking it properly would use up your entire firewood pile for the week. So when someone does roast meat, it becomes an event. People gather. Smells spread. Children hover like moths. One bite is enough to make your eyes close involuntarily. Even the fat, especially the fat, is savored. No waste. Never. You've heard rumors of black pudding made from blood and oats. You've tried it once. It was rich, earthy, and made you feel full for hours. You still think about it. And then there are the truly odd meats: hedgehogs, dormice, badgers. When hunger is high, nothing is off the table. A farmer once brought in a goose so old it had to be boiled for 8 hours and then pounded with a hammer. It was chewable. You return home and stir your evening stew. It's mostly leeks and turnips, but someone threw in a chicken neck today. Luxury. The broth has that faint oily shimmer you associate with the nobility. You close your eyes and sip slowly, letting it coat your tongue like velvet. This is as close to roast swan as you're getting. As the night falls and the fire dims, your belly's not full, but it's not empty. You lie back and imagine what it must be like to eat until you choose to stop. To push away a plate, not because it's empty, but because you're done. For now you'll settle for dreams. In them, you sit at a noble's table, a platter of venison before you, and no one watching when you reach for seconds. The next morning, your dreams of venison vanish like smoke, replaced by a bowl of something green and vaguely wet. You blink at it. Is that boiled cabbage again? You pick up your spoon and begin the morning ritual, poking suspiciously at your vegetables. Here's the thing: in the medieval world, vegetables are complicated. You'd think they'd be celebrated as a staple of every diet, but actually they're kind of suspicious. Among peasants, vegetables are basic survival. You grow them in your backyard or borrow someone else's garden when they're not looking. You boil them until they're limp, then boil them again for good measure. They're fibrous, bitter, and absolutely unglamorous, but they keep you alive. Among nobles, vegetables are practically an insult. They're peasant food, earthy and untrustworthy. You won't find lords nibbling on boiled turnips unless they're disguised in a pie under a pound of butter and 10 spices. In fact, raw vegetables are considered risky. The medical theory of the time, rooted in the four humors, warns that cold, moist foods like lettuce or cucumbers can cause gas, weakness, and a slackness of the spirit, whatever that means. So naturally, your cabbage has been cooked into a translucent pile of sadness to prevent any emotional looseness. Historians still debate how accurate those dietary guidelines were, but one thing's clear: vegetables were treated more like medicine than cuisine. You stir the cabbage a bit more. It's joined by a few onions, a strip of parsnip, and miracle of miracles, a carrot. Not orange, mind you. Medieval carrots are usually purple or white. Orange comes later with Dutch breeding. For now, your carrot looks like a root vegetable from outer space. The smell is earthy, swampy, and a little bit hopeful. You take a bite. It's soft, flavorless, slightly sulfuric. You chew anyway, because this is what food looks like when you're poor and landbound. Cabbage, onions, leeks, turnips, beans, maybe a bit of garlic if you're lucky and socially daring. These vegetables grow in all weather, don't require fancy soil, and can survive long winters in root cellars, which means they survive you. And let's not forget the peas pudding. Mashed peas boiled into a thick, protein-rich paste, then scraped onto bread like green cement. It's not terrible, and it keeps you going, but you won't exactly write poetry about it. Your neighbor once tried to grow melons. They rotted in the rain. Another family attempted artichokes. The goats ate them. It's not just about taste, it's about what can live where you live. And most of what lives around here has the flavor profile of wet cardboard. You once asked an older woman about salad. She looked at you like you'd asked if clouds could be eaten. Raw leaves. That's for sick people and goats. End of conversation. You remember hearing about a traveling friar who ate something called a radish and apple salad. People gathered around just to watch him eat it like it was a miracle. He claimed it cleansed the liver. We're not sure if it did, but it definitely cleared the room. In town, vegetables are often pickled, preserved in brine, or fermented into things that resemble food if you squint. Sauerkraut. A genius invention. Keeps forever. Smells like defeat. Tastes like, well, something. You get up and head out to the garden. It's small and tired. Rows of wilted greens and a patch of struggling legumes. You check the beets. One is decent sized. You pull it from the dirt and hold it like treasure. It'll go into tonight's stew, add color, maybe even a whisper of sweetness. Occasionally someone tries to get creative. You've seen vegetable pies, onion tarts, even roasted squash. But spices are expensive. Fat is rare. And without those, even the best vegetables feel like you're chewing politely on rain-dampened newspaper. Back in the house, someone is scraping the last of the pot. They found a rutabaga chunk and are holding it like it's gold. A child nearby cries when they don't get it. You offer them your carrot end. They sniff it, decline. Even children know when to say no. You hear of exotic things like asparagus and spinach, but they're rare in your region. The nobles might cultivate them in walled gardens with trained gardeners. You meanwhile fight slugs and pray for rain. Or not too much rain, just the right amount of rain. Which never happens. Sometimes vegetables come from the woods, wild garlic, sorrel, nettles. But foraging is tricky. Pick the wrong leaf, and you're spending the night sweating through a herbal hallucination while someone waves sage under your nose. Once someone made a stew with wild mushrooms. No one died. That was the surprise. You finish your bowl and feel a bit bloated. Not full exactly, but full enough to function. Fiber is the one thing the medieval diet has in abundance. You'll pay for it later when your gut does its daily protest march. But for now, you're vertical and able to work. As evening rolls in, you roast the beet with a bit of onion over the fire. The smell is surprisingly pleasant. Sweet, earthy, almost festive. It's still just vegetables. But tonight at least it's different vegetables. And that makes all the difference. You wake to the sound of bells ringing in the distance, church bells signaling a feast day. Not a personal feast, of course, a religious one. You dress, brush the sleep from your eyes, and shuffle toward the manor grounds with a mix of dread and hope. Today you're going to witness the grand illusion of medieval cuisine, the noble feast. As you approach the hall, you already smell the difference. Roasting meat, baking pies, cinnamon cloves, and maybe even saffron dancing through the air like fragrant ghosts. You swallow hard and step closer, your boots squelching in the mud, like it's a reminder of where you belong. The manor is alive with servants darting around, dogs barking at pigeons, and a group of musicians trying to tune instruments with more enthusiasm than skill. Inside, it's warm, smoky, loud. Long wooden tables groan under the weight of trays, trenchers, and gold-painted jugs. You take it all in like someone studying a holy relic. Feast days are rare spectacles, but when they happen, they are theatrical. For nobles, food isn't just sustenance, it's performance. First course. Probably something absurd. A roast peacock with feathers reattached for flair. Or a cockatrice, a Frankenstein monster of food, made by sewing half a pig to half a goose. You stare, trying to figure out what direction it's supposed to face. None of this food is for you, of course. You're standing against the back wall serving sweeping, or maybe just hoping for leftovers. The nobles laugh, drink, and toss bones to their hounds. Someone makes a joke about fasting as they lift a leg of lamb glistening with fat. You smile politely, your stomach clenching like a fist. The bread on the tables isn't like yours. It's soft white, made from sifted wheat flour that's so fine it squeaks between your fingers. It's called manchet, and it's the bread equivalent of royalty. Meanwhile, your daily loaf is closer to a brick than a baked good. Still, you watch and learn. You see pottages decorated with flower petals, pies shaped like castles, and sauces so thick and spicy they hide whatever unfortunate meat lies beneath. That's the trick. Most of the food looks better than it tastes. It's meant to impress, not satisfy. The flavors are often strange to modern palates: sweet meats, sour custards, fish, and almond milk. Historians still debate whether medieval nobles actually enjoyed these odd combinations, or just tolerated them as status symbols. One thing's for sure: if a dish doesn't use 5 spices and involve at least one fruit, it's not making it to the high table. You spot the subtleties next. Not in flavor, but in form: those whimsical edible sculptures made from sugar paste, marzipan, or molded jelly. One looks like a castle, another a tree with birds. They're not for eating, they're for gawking. You help carry a dish to the table and catch a whiff of something delicate: rosewater custard, perhaps. It smells like the dream of dessert. You can't imagine what it would taste like, and you never will. When nobles tire of the heavy meats, they dab daintily at bowls of spiced rice, or nibble on dates and figs imported from lands you can't even pronounce. A minstrel starts singing a song about a knight who found a magic ham. No one listens. Eventually, you're dismissed to the kitchens where the real feast begins. Because now it's leftover time. You and the other workers scrape meat off bones, sop up sauces with stale crusts, and fight over the corners of pies. It's chaotic, loud, and vaguely joyful. For once, you're eating something beyond root vegetables and oat glue. You find a bit of roast duck, dry but rich. You chew slowly, eyes closed. A dab of sauce follows sharp with vinegar and honey. You feel like royalty for a moment. Then someone elbows you in the ribs and steals your bone. You laugh. Not everything served at noble feasts is edible. Some dishes are made just to be admired: meat pies filled with live birds, or jellies dyed with ground lapis lazuli. It's absurd, wasteful, but also magical in a weird way. Like food is theater, and everyone's an actor, even the hungry ones. As the feast dies down, you help clear the tables. Grease stains, chicken feet, half-chewed apples, goblets tipped over in merriment. The nobles stagger out, full and flushed. You wonder what it must feel like to eat so much that you choose to stop. You'll never know. Outside, night has fallen. The stars look cold and quiet. You walk home, belly slightly heavier, hands still smelling of garlic and lamb fat. Tonight you'll dream of pies that don't crumble and wine that doesn't sting. You'll dream of eating with both hands and using cloth napkins instead of your sleeve. Tomorrow it's back to cabbage, but tonight you got a glimpse. And somehow that's enough. You wake in the middle of the night with a rumble in your stomach and a sharp, familiar dread. Not hunger this time. It's a different kind of gamble. Did that cheese betray you? By morning the answer is clear. You shuffle out of your hut, clutching your belly, hoping you make it to the edge of the woods in time. As you squat beneath a dew-covered hedge, you swear softly under your breath, not at nature, but at dairy. That sneaky, spoiled liar of a food group. See, in medieval Europe, dairy is a dangerous game. One day it's your saving grace. The next, it's a fermented horror that leaves you sweating through your shirt and questioning your life choices. Your relationship with milk is complicated. Fresh milk is a luxury and also a liability. It sours fast sometimes by the time you walk it home. No refrigeration means it's basically a ticking time bomb from the moment the cow blinks at you. Historians still argue whether fresh milk was regularly consumed by peasants or mostly turned into butter and cheese immediately. The safe bet: you drink it only when there's no better option, and even then you sniff. First swirl, second, and sip third, cautiously. Today's breakfast starts with curds and barley bread. The curds are white squishy and smell acceptable. You bite, chew, wait. No protest from your gut. So far, so good. But let's talk cheese. Cheese is the medieval way of saying this milk won't survive tomorrow, but maybe it can live forever. You press salt and age it until it transforms into something edible, sort of. Sometimes it's soft, sometimes it's rock hard, and requires a knife, a hammer, and a prayer to eat. You've got a small wheel aging under your bed. You check on it like a pet sniffing for mold, hoping it hasn't turned green, whispering encouragement. And don't even get started on butter. That golden fantasy. It's labor-intensive, messy, and weirdly revered. Butter's used for cooking, sure, but also for healing wounds, bribing priests, and occasionally gifting your landlord, so he doesn't increase your taxes. Butter, what currency. But just like milk, butter spoils fast, especially in the summer. It melts into goo and picks up every smell in the hut: smoke, sweat, dried fish. You once spread a piece of butter on bread and were hit with a distinct note of dirty sock. You still ate it. Then there's the watery leftovers from cheese making. No one wants it, but you drink it anyway. Some say it's good for digestion. Others say it tastes like goat bath water. Both are true. A traveler once told you about something called yogurt. You asked what it was, and they described it as milk gone thick and tangy on purpose. You stared at them for a long time. You've had sour milk plenty of times, but on purpose, that's a stretch. Monks, of course, take dairy more seriously. Some abbeys are famous for their cheese. Rich, aged, even smokable. They guard their recipes like scripture. You tasted monk cheese once. It made your tongue weep with joy, and then again with cramps an hour later. Worth it, definitely. Your cottage's dairy comes from one skinny cow with attitude. She gives just enough milk to make one small round of cheese a week, assuming she's not kicked over the bucket or wandered off mid-milking. One time she sneezed into the pail. You drank it anyway. Protein is protein. Sometimes you trade for goat's milk. It's stronger, tangier, and usually comes in less reliable containers. Once someone brought it in a hollowed gourd. It tasted like wood and goat. You drank that too. The worst is when someone tries to stretch spoiled dairy. You've seen butter resalted and reformed to mask spoilage. You've watched curds scraped of mold and flipped to the clean side. It's culinary denial at its finest. Then there are the folk remedies. Stomach ache, try butter rubbed on your chest. Bad dreams, place a round of cheese under your pillow. Warts, rub them with curds. You're not sure any of it works, but you've tried most of them. Desperation makes herbalism look like science. You remember a midsummer festival where someone brought clotted cream. Thick, sweet, and piled onto slices of sweet oat cake. It was heavenly. People wept. Someone proposed marriage. You still think about it. But most days dairy is neither a luxury nor a joy. It's just a risk. Every spoonful could be nourishment or a 12-hour bowel expedition. Today the cheese holds. It's sharp, crumbly, and tastes like the memory of butter from a better time. You smear it on bread and eat slowly, knowing full well this may be the best thing you eat all week. As evening falls, you take another cautious sip of buttermilk. Tangy. No curdles. A good sign. You lie back on your mat stomach, gurgling softly, possibly in gratitude, possibly in warning. You won't know until sunrise. And as your eyes close, you wonder, what if there was a world where milk stayed fresh, cheese didn't sweat in the dark, and butter was spreadable year-round? You dream of that place, and wake up in yours. It's market day again, and the square is humming livestock, bleating traders barking prices, and the occasional thud of something dropping from a cart that was probably not packed with care. You wander the stalls clutching a few grimy coins, hoping to score something real. Something fresh, something that won't make your stomach write a death note later. You stop at the spice vendor's table. He's a slick-talking man with crooked teeth and a velvet pouch full of dreams. You peer into a tiny sack labeled pepper and immediately feel skeptical. It's a bit too crumbly, suspiciously dark. You pinch some between your fingers. Smells like burnt breadcrumbs. Congratulations. You've just been introduced to one of medieval Europe's most common crimes: food forgery. See, with spices imported from far-off lands and sold at absurd prices, you were never going to get real cinnamon or pepper, unless you were a noble, a monk, or extremely lucky in your marriage choices. So the markets fill the gap with knockoffs. That's not clove. It's dried bark. That's not nutmeg. It's a mixture of ground walnut shells and desperation. That's saffron, probably marigold petals soaked in beet juice. You sigh. This is normal. Historians still argue how widespread food fraud really was, but nearly every record mentions it, either with warnings, fines, or some poor soul getting dunked in the river for trying to pass off ground pebbles as flour. You move on to a fishmonger who swears his wares are fresh. You make eye contact with a herring that has very clearly been dead since the last lunar cycle. He sprinkles it with some fragrant herbs and fans the smell toward you like that's going to resurrect the thing. You move on. You find a vendor selling butter. It's soft. Too soft. The sun's been up for hours and it's practically soup. Still, he's offering a deal, 3 lumps for 1 coin. You ask if it's fresh. He nods and insists it's been kept in shade. The shade apparently of last week. Then there's the baker. His loaves are golden and glorious. You know better. That color. That's not fine wheat. That's probably ground carrot or dye made from lichen. You once saw someone mix brick dust into dough to make it look richer. It worked until people chipped teeth. Still, you buy a small loaf. It's heavy as a stone and smells vaguely of chalk, but you haven't had bread from a real oven in days. Let's talk about those food laws. They exist. Sort of. Some towns enforce rules about bread weight, ale strength, and market freshness. But enforcement is flexible. Bakers routinely get caught selling undersized loaves. Brewers water down their ale. Butchers mislabel cuts of meat. You remember a public punishment: a man caught stretching meat with breadcrumbs and animal skin was pilloried with a sausage around his neck. People laughed, then bought sausages from the next stall over. Because honestly, no one's above a little culinary con. You do what you have to do. You pass a woman selling spiced wine. It's red, pungent, and sold from a wooden jug with a cracked ladle. You sip. It's more vinegar than wine, but the spices give it enough kick to pretend you're in a tavern in Florence. You cough once. Buy a cup anyway. You find yourself at a stall offering candied almonds. You haven't seen sugar in months. You bite in sweet, warm, and slightly chewy. For one glorious second, you're not in a mud hut village. You're in a dream of almonds, honey, and hope. Then your tooth cracks on something hard, a pebble, maybe a clump of sugar that never melted. You don't complain. You just chew the other side. By now your pouch is lighter. Your hands are sticky, and your breath smells like sour wine and onion crust. You sit at the edge of the market watching a monk argue with a fishwife about the freshness of her eels. He loses. The spice merchant walks by again loudly, declaring he has true cinnamon from Cathay. You know better. It's probably powdered sawdust with a splash of rosewater. But someone buys a pinch anyway. Hope sells faster than truth. You pull out your day's purchases: a suspicious loaf, half a cup of wine, a wedge of cheese with a crack in it, and 3 wrinkled apples that might actually be pears. You arrange them on your lap and smile. It's not perfect, it's barely real, but it's yours. You think back to the church's rules about honest trade. The Bible frowns on deceitful weights and dishonest scales. The market frowns too, but only if someone complains loud enough. And the worst part, you've done it too. Watered your ale, fluffed up a stew with old root mash, added ashes to bread to give it smoky flavor. You're not proud, but you're not alone. As you pack up to leave, a man offers you imported pepper again. You smile, wave, and whisper, "Already got some." He nods knowingly, like 2 stage actors in the same tragic play. You walk home with your satchel of half-lies and hopeful meals. Tonight's dinner will be a mixture of almost foods, slightly spoiled things, and an optimism you can't afford to lose. Because in the medieval kitchen, what matters isn't purity or pedigree, it's getting through the meal without gagging, weeping, or waking up in a panic at midnight. You rise to the sound of bells again, but this time, no smoke, no pots boiling, no sizzle of lard. Just silence and the growl of your stomach. You stretch, glance toward the hearth, and remember, today is a fast day. Again. You roll onto your back and stare at the thatched ceiling like it's responsible for your hunger. Because in medieval Europe, the only thing more regular than bad food is not eating at all for religious reasons. The church runs your calendar, and that calendar is an obstacle course of fasts, vigils, and dietary restrictions. Over 150 days a year, give or take, you are forbidden from eating meat, dairy, eggs, or anything that tastes remotely joyful. Historians still argue how strictly these fasts were observed by peasants. Some say people bent the rules quietly. Others say rural communities took them seriously. But either way, you feel it in your bones, in your gut, and in the sheer emptiness of your dinner bowl. Today is Friday. That means no meat. Tomorrow, Saints' Vigil. No meat again. Sunday's a feast technically, but only if someone remembered. Then Lent's coming, and that's 40 days of you'd better like boiled peas. You wander outside, sniffing the air for anything promising. A neighbor is stirring something in a pot. You lean in. Is it fish, you ask hopefully? They lift the lid. It's water and oats. You nod like that's fine. Fish is the allowed meat substitute, which sounds generous until you realize how far inland you are. There's no river here, and salted herring costs more than your monthly rent if you had one. On rare occasions, a traveling fishmonger brings eels or dried cod. Once you saw something labeled trout that looked suspiciously like rat, you didn't ask questions. So what do you eat on fast days pottage? Again, thin gruel made from legumes, greens, onions, sometimes a splash of almond milk if you're lucky enough to get almonds. But usually it's just heat hope and yesterday's rinse water with a few leaves floating in it. You once tried to fake it, adding pork drippings to your stew on a Friday. A neighbor smelled it. You spent 3 days doing penance and 4 days regretting the stomach cramps. The church doesn't just control what you eat, it defines your sins by what's in your bowl. And when you break fast, it's not just frowned upon, it's a confession waiting to happen. You remember the town priest explaining that fasting cleanses the soul. It brings you closer to Christ's suffering. You nodded politely while chewing a dandelion stem. But the truth is, fasting isn't spiritual, it's survival in costume. Most peasants can't afford meat daily anyway. The church's calendar just turns your poverty into piety. And don't forget the ember days, which arrive 4 times a year scattered like landmines. You never remember them until it's too late, until you're halfway through a boiled egg and someone whispers, "It's Ember Wednesday." Then you sigh, swallow, and accept your eternal fate. Even feast days have rules. Before the party, there's always a fast. So for every roast goose you might get once a year, there are at least 3 days of boiled turnips and silent chewing. You've also heard of monks taking fasting to legendary extremes, eating only once a day, or subsisting solely on barley water and cold vegetables. One abbey supposedly banned salt during Lent. You imagine that meal cabbage boiled in despair. You return to your hut and check your stores. 1 onion, a turnip with a crack in it, a sack of dried beans. You decide to soak the beans for later and gnaw on the turnip like it owes you money. By evening you've got a pot of bean pottage simmering slowly over the fire. No lard, no meat, just herbs, maybe a bit of vinegar for bite. The smell is honest. If blandness could pray, this is what it would smell like. Across the village, someone lights a fire early. The scent of roasting something forbidden drifts through the air. You glance around. Is it duck? Is it even legal? You say nothing. You just breathe it in like a sinner at a bakery. Your stomach growls loud enough to startle a nearby chicken. You sigh and sip your stew. Some people stretch the rules with fake foods. Almond milk masquerading as cream. Breadcrumbs shaped like meatballs. Fish made from ground rice and saffron molded into little carp and fried in oil. Once you were served a roast peacock that turned out to be beetroot inside cabbage leaves. Clever. Cruel. The nobility have chefs who specialize in this food theater. You meanwhile mold porridge into cubes and pretend they're cheese. When the hunger gets bad, you drink. Water filtered through your anxiety. Ale weaker on fast days. Maybe a tea made of mint and sorrow. You think of those who fast as a choice monks, nobles, pilgrims. For you, it's more like role-playing starvation in slow motion. As night falls, you roll up in your blanket and listen to your stomach churn. You're not just hungry, you're hollow. You dream of eggs cracking open, of dripping meat, of cheese melting on hot bread. Then you wake up and remember tomorrow is another vigil. You smile, tight-lipped. You tell yourself it's for the soul. But really, it's just another day of empty plates and slightly darker thoughts. You're lying flat on your back, staring up at the thatched roof. And your stomach isn't just growling, it's staging a full-blown rebellion. There's a strange tightness in your chest, a sharp emptiness behind your ribs. You recognize this feeling. Everyone does. Famine. Not hunger, not fasting, not a skipped meal. This is different. This is absence. Outside the fields are wrong. Too dry, or too wet, or too cold, or too something. A harvest has failed again, and like clockwork, everything falls apart. You drag yourself out of bed. There's no smell of cooking. No smoke curling from chimneys. Just silence, except for the cough of the wind through brittle stalks. You shuffle to the pantry. It's already been scavenged. A crust of bread so old it could be used as a weapon. A jar of something pickled that may or may not be edible anymore. You dip a finger and taste it, and immediately gag. You set it back on the shelf like it bit you. You glance over at your neighbor's hut. The door's open. You walk over slowly and peek inside. Empty. Not of people, they're huddled together under blankets, but of everything else. No food, no kindling, just eyes dull from waiting. This isn't just your problem, it's everybody's. In the medieval world, food isn't guaranteed. It's weather-dependent, pest-dependent, miracle-dependent. And when things go wrong, when blight kills the crops, when floods drown the barley, when late frosts erase a season, it sets off a chain reaction of panic, hoarding, theft, and despair. You've seen people bake bread from moss and bark. You've watched women strip trees of leaves to boil into soup. You once tried to eat raw oats. That mistake cost you a full night of stomach cramps and regret. And if things go really bad, that's when the rye starts talking. You've heard the whispers ergot. A mold that grows on damp grain and doesn't just poison it, hallucinates. People who eat infected rye see things, hear voices, twitch, scream, dance until they collapse. Some call it cursed. Others say it's the devil. Most just call it bad bread. Historians still debate how many medieval possessions were actually just mass outbreaks of ergot poisoning. But one thing is certain: when you're hungry, any bread looks good. You boil water just to drink something warm. It smells like ash. You find a scrap of dried root, drop it in. Close enough to tea. You sip. Your stomach groans in confusion. The church bells ring again. A town meeting. You trudge over boots heavy with mud and hopelessness. The reeve announces that grain rations are being cut in half. Someone sobs. No one protests. They're too tired. A man down the road was caught stealing from a garden. He got his hand broken. Not by the authorities, by the gardener. Things are slipping. Fast. You remember last year's famine. People left. Just walked out of the village. Some came back weeks later, thinner, quieter. Some didn't come back at all. You think of your cousin who died of fever, though everyone knew it was starvation in disguise. The worst, the rumors. You hear whispers of families boiling shoe leather, of bones ground into powder and mixed into porridge, of dogs going missing, of children you stop there, you don't want to know. You return home and see a small pile of something on your doorstep. Turnip peelings, probably left by someone who had just enough to share and barely enough to survive. You pick them up like they're gold and add them to your pot. Night falls and the air is cold. You curl into your blanket and listen to the world shrink. No laughter, no singing. Just the creak of wind and the occasional eerie sound of someone dry heaving in the dark. You think about the Great Famine of 1315, when rain drowned Europe and entire villages starved. You think about the stories of nobles rationing meat while peasants chewed on straw. You wonder how close you are to that line. You dream of bread. Thick, warm, soft. When you wake, your mouth is wet, your pillow damp with drool. You get up and do it again. Because famine doesn't come all at once. It's not a scream, it's a slow fade. A tightening. A day-by-day erosion of fullness until all that's left is hope stretched thin and salted with fear. You count your days by what you don't eat. And you pray silently, constantly, not for a feast, just for enough. You rise before dawn, barely rested, already weary, and drawn toward the one place you haven't yet explored fully, in this culinary catastrophe, your own kitchen. Calling it a kitchen is generous. It's more like a smoky corner, with a fire pit, a soot-coated iron hook, and a few wooden utensils scorched around the edges. There's no chimney, just a hole in the thatch that only works when the wind is in a good mood. Most days, the smoke just lingers, curling into your lungs, turning your walls black and your eyes glassy. This morning, you're squinting through that haze, stirring a pot of something that once resembled food. It's bubbling suspiciously. You pretend it's soup, because the medieval kitchen is a nightmare. There's no running water, no ventilation, no surfaces you'd trust. You wash your hands once a day, if that. Dishes wiped with bread or rinsed in gray water and left to dry, which means develop character. A chicken wanders and pecks at the corner of your table, then walks out. You don't chase it. It probably eats better than you do. You crouch near the hearth, trying to avoid the worst of the smoke. Your clothes are already stained with grease ash and what might be yesterday's onion stew. You've stopped asking. The floor's packed dirt. It absorbs everything: water crumbs and last week's porridge spill that now smells slightly fermented. The pot boils over. You yank it off the hook, spilling hot liquid onto your foot. You hiss, mutter something half prayer, half curse, and shake it off. This is your life now, perpetual smoky inconvenience. Historians still argue how widespread kitchen ventilation was across medieval Europe. Some wealthier homes had flues or basic chimneys, but for most peasants you cooked in smoke and hoped your lungs gave up slower than your firewood. Speaking of firewood, it's scarce. It takes hours to gather, and good wood is hoarded like treasure. You're down to damp sticks and peat lumps, which don't burn so much as smolder. Your stew now tastes like earthy smoke with a hint of moldy moss. You lift the lid to check on your meal. It's gray. That's the flavor profile, gray. Bits of root vegetables swirl around a bone you've reused for 3 weeks. You pretend it's a stock base. It's mostly just wishful thinking. You grab your only knife, a bent, dull thing you inherited from someone who once used it to carve turnips, and probably their initials into church pews. You scrape the side of a radish. It resists. You give up. Flies buzz lazily around the table. You wave them away with a bundle of herbs that doubles as fly swatter and spice rack. Everything here is multi-purpose. Efficiency isn't just a choice, it's a survival tactic. Your storage shelf holds sad shriveled remnants, a clove of garlic hardened into marble, a stale loaf harder than theology, a lump of lard you're saving for a special day that never comes. Above you, a string of onions hangs from a rafter, gradually turning into decorative art. You used to have dried herbs too, but they caught fire last week when the pig kicked over a candle. You glance over at your cutting board, a slab of wood with a dark stain you've learned not to investigate. It rocks slightly when you press on it. You keep using it anyway. The walls are streaked with smoke and grease. The ceiling drips during heavy rain, adding damp mystery splash to whatever you're cooking. Some days it adds texture, other days illness, and yet this is your castle. You know it's every crack, every creak, every soot-marked corner. You know where the spoon hides when it falls through the floor slats. You know exactly how long you can leave porridge before it turns into wall paste. You've measured life in boils and burns. Even the smells burned fat old cabbage wet ash, they don't repulse you anymore. They ground you. Remind you of the 1,000 meals you've made with nothing but stubbornness and a half-dead carrot. You take a sip of the stew. It's edible. You dip a bit of bread in and chew slowly. Crunch. You spit out a pebble. Another one from the millstones. You place it on the growing pile on the shelf. Your gravel collection. A neighbor knocks on the doorframe, sniffs, and asks what's cooking. You shrug. Wednesday. They nod, understanding instantly. Flavor is irrelevant. Consistency is religion. A child enters barefoot, holding a beet like it's a relic. You chop it and stir it in. The color turns the pot into something beautiful for a moment, like food might actually smile back at you. By sunset, the stew is gone. The fire is low. You wipe your face with your sleeve and let the smoke settle into your clothes like a second skin. And then you sit cross-legged in the stillness. Your kitchen, chaotic, grimy, alive, feels sacred somehow. Not because it's clean or organized or Instagram-worthy, but because it's yours. A battlefield. A womb. A kind of stubborn, smoke-streaked hope. Because despite everything, rot, hunger, salt, fast fakes, and flames, you've survived another meal. And in this time, in this place, that is no small miracle. You lie back on your straw mat, the fire's last glow fading to embers, the room still warm with the scent of ash and old onions. Your stomach isn't full, but it's no longer pleading. That counts as peace. The night air slips through the thatch, brushing your cheeks with a chill that feels oddly clean. Somewhere an owl hoots, the chickens settle. The world, for all its hunger and hardship, quiets. You close your eyes and let your breathing slow. The ache behind your eyes softens. The tension in your shoulders begins to drift. For a few long silent moments, you're not hungry or tired, or struggling with a pot that won't boil. You're simply still. You picture a loaf of warm bread resting on a clean cloth. You imagine a bite of something sweet, the crunch of a fresh apple, the warmth of butter that doesn't taste like goat. You let those thoughts carry you, not because they're real, but because they remind you why you endure. You've walked through the kitchens and markets and feasts and famines of a world that demanded resilience. You've faced fire, rot, and ridicule, armed with nothing but a wooden spoon and unrelenting stubbornness. And still here you are. So let the night deepen, let the smoke fade, let the last curl of warmth cling to your skin. You've earned your rest. Sleep now. We'll dream of sweeter meals, of softer mornings, of days where the bread isn't hard and the stew doesn't lie. Until then, just breathe. The hunger is quiet for now, and the dark is kind. Sweet dreams.